Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
You know, I am actively looking for the radical left's version of conservative not bitter. Can you imagine, by the way, radically left not bitter? Can you imagine that as we watch what's happening with the Southern Poverty Law Center, as we watch some of these politicians like Pocahontas, which I can say, by the way, I am the self-appointed spokesperson of the Pocahontas family, proven by genealogy. At least I've got some records put together by genealogists, and actually a couple that show that we are, in fact, direct descendants of Pocahontas, which actually is pretty cool. But there is some question that some have about that, but I've seen it, my friends. I can criticize Pocahontas because of this, because that's what the genealogists have said anyway. But I'm looking for the alternative, the left's alternative to conservative not bitter. They are so bitter and so enraged and so deceitful and so angry about everything, my friends. We are not. We're here to help you hear the truth, because I think, well, I know that matters, and there's a lot of things I want to get to today, but I don't have the time. In fact, we get to some of the things I can't get to in our daily Inner Circle email, which you can get for free. Text TRUTH to 317-785-1030 if you want to get that. It's totally free. But I want to talk today about something we talked about a couple of days ago, or at least give you an update and discuss this. But I want to give you an update. So, headline here. Let's see, which one do I want to start with? I want to start with this one at the Epic Times first. Judge rules Virginia redistricting referendum unconstitutional. We talked about this. We talked about this on, I want to say Wednesday. I think it was. It was right after this referendum, and if you didn't tune in, shame on you. I'm kidding, but if you didn't tune in, or if you didn't, if you're just catching up, you've been busy, whatever. Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, has passed law, a constitutional amendment by referendum that would allow the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, to redraw their congressional districts, giving Democrats in that state, based upon voting trends and surveys and all that sort of thing, it would give Democrats an advantage to potentially have 10 congressional seats in Virginia, giving Republicans only one. And currently, Virginia is a 6-5 state when it comes to the breakdown. 6 Democrat representatives, 5 Republicans. I went through this again on Wednesday. I don't want to rehash that. If you want to listen to it, you can go back to Wednesday's episode. But I do want to say, just to give you the summary so that we can kind of hit the ground running here, I've been remarkably consistent on this. The Virginia legislature, the state legislature, it is their prerogative to redistrict. This hurts Republicans. I don't like that they pass this referendum for political purposes, because the biggest domestic problem we face in this country are people on the left in Congress preventing things like the SAVE Act, doing things that add inflationary pressures to the economy, doing things like kind of even at the admission of John Fetterman and another representative in Congress from the Northwest. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but they've come out and said the Democrat Party is not really pro-American and cheering for our side to win in this war in Iran, for example. Some bad things that are coming from today's Democrat Party. But I have been remarkably consistent. The legislature can redraw the lines. However, they have to follow whatever their state's rules are for doing said redistricting. And that is where the rub is, because according to this judge, which now this is headed to the Supreme Court in the state of Commonwealth of Virginia, according to this judge, the referendum is unconstitutional. So I want to talk about this. I want to unpack this. I want to play a soundbite from Jay Jones, the Attorney General in the state of Virginia. He is a Democrat, but he was on an interview here recently. I just want to play this, talk about this, because we hit on this and said that this is very possibly going to be the outcome of this. We shall see. We shall see. It's a dangerous situation, or it's a precarious situation to find ourselves in, to think that the only thing that would prevent this would be a court, especially given the less propensity for judicial activism, which is what they're accusing this particular judge of, which is wild stuff. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well today, my friends. But you've worked hard. You've made smart choices. Now it's about making sure that that effort counts, not just for today, my friends, but for your future, your family's future. Full Suite Wealth helps forward-thinking people with a coordinated approach to wealth, legacy, and legal planning, including private equity, private credit, and options strategies. They'll help you see the big picture, plan ahead, and make your success truly matter for the people you care about the most. The goal is to give you a plan that stands the test of time. Visit fullsuitewealth.com. Again, that's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Okay. Let's get into this. Headline here. The Epic Times, judge rules Virginia redistricting referendum unconstitutional. A Virginia judge ruled on April 22nd that the state's redistricting referendum approved by voters a day earlier was invalid, nullifying the election results. Basically saying this was an invalid election. This ruling came out Wednesday. The referendum was on Tuesday. This, of course, now we're on Friday. So this was immediately in the immediate aftermath of this referendum passing. Virginia Attorney General Jay Jones said he would immediately file an appeal. Virginia voters have spoken, and an activist judge should not have veto power over the people's vote, Jones said in an X post, which we'll talk about that. But let's continue. Is it Tazewell Circuit Court Judge Jack Hurley entered an injunction blocking certification of the election. Former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli said the legal fight was just beginning after language used in the ballot raised a lot of interest among the opposition. Let me pause. Again, on Wednesday's program, which would have been the day after this referendum, and actually the day that the judge made this ruling, this injunction, we went through Ken Cuccinelli. He has 4 points as to why this case, this referendum could actually be stopped because of legal purposes, which to me is just rich with irony, right? Because you have the left who have taken the position that says that the Republicans are trying to take advantage of their political power in states like Indiana, even though we didn't have Republicans who had the spine, the backbone, the political will, the foresight, the understanding, the practical wisdom to understand what we are dealing with, what the threat is, and how it must be defeated. They criticized Indiana. They wailed as though life as we knew it was over in this, well, as they say, in this democracy. I would say our constitutional republic. It was over because we even voted. We even tried in Indiana to redistrict because that was such an abuse of power. But it's totally cool when they do it in the Commonwealth of Virginia because, see, the Democrats have positioned it that, hey, we're just trying to keep up with the Republicans, which is absolutely false. Democrats have played these games for a long time. As I've said before, you can go look. In fact, I encourage you, go look yourselves. Go look and see which states have all of their congressional districts that are one color or the other. It certainly happens in a lot of states, but look at how they got there. Look at the shapes of their districts. Understand what gerrymandering is. Gerrymandering isn't redrawing a district simply because the people responsible for that, which, by the way, constitutionally is the state legislature. It isn't saying gerrymandering isn't just redrawing a district that's favorable to your party. Gerrymandering is specifically drawing a district that is in a completely strange shape in order to get that advantage. And you'll find, I'm not saying you won't find any Republican districts that you cannot argue are gerrymandered. You will find that there are many, many more in Democrat districts, and there is actually a reason for this. See, Republicans, they are typically not in the cities, not in urban areas. And so they're more spread out across the more, I'll use the word rural. I don't know, depending upon the state, there might not really be a lot of rural area, especially in the Northeast. But the further you get from the cities, you'll find a higher percentage of Republicans. And what happens is Democrats, in order to get an advantage, they want to slice up that city in the metropolitan area as much as possible so that they can get that highly dense blue population of their state to be in as many of those districts as possible, just giving them an advantage in each of the districts that they can slice it out of. And look at the Virginia map. I mean, it's exactly what it is. It goes up to Metro DC area, and there's a bunch of tiny little slivers that come off of the northern or maybe northeastern, however you look at Virginia. It's kind of an odd-shaped state, but that part of the state, the high point that's up there in the metropolitan DC area, has a bunch of districts now. It doesn't currently, but the new referendum has these districts that are little slivers that splinter off from the metropolitan DC area. It's clearly much more gerrymandered than Indiana ever dreamt of being, just looking at the shapes of the district. But see, people don't do this. They listen to people. They hear the left make this case, this narrative, paint this picture. They say Republicans have been doing this. They've been the ones abusing their power. We have no choice but to, I guess, abuse the power that we're accusing them of abusing, doing that ourselves. But it's to get even because they're the side that's cheating, which is just factually untrue. But this somehow garners traction in the minds of voters. It is remarkable to me the power that the media still has over the narrative, especially for those who refuse to think for themselves, especially for those who just are consumers of news instead of thinkers, and people who want to think about these things as freedom-loving Americans with the responsibility to understand what is actually going on and what the real sources of our problems are, instead of just following the narrative. But they follow it hook, line, and sinker. And it's ironic if they are going to be struck down for violating the law while saying the Republicans are the ones who have been taking advantage of this circumstance and this situation, and they're the ones that started it, when, of course, it's just so tasty to me to watch the Democrats have to defend how they broke the law, maybe in multiple ways here. But there are multiple problems with this, and I went through that on Wednesday, and that's been laid out by former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, which this article talks about here. This is specifically talking about the language in the referendum. We talked about that on Wednesday as well. Here's the question that voters faced while filling out their ballots, completing the referendum earlier this week. This is how it read, and I've shared this with you before. I'm going to share it again. Ask yourself, is this how the question should have been phrased on a supposed objective ballot? Just providing information as fairly as possible so that the people voting on the referendum could actually make a decision instead of being pushed one way or the other. Listen to this and tell me if this does this, because newsflash, it doesn't. Should the Constitution of Virginia be amended to allow the General Assembly to temporarily adopt new congressional districts to restore fairness in upcoming elections while ensuring Virginia's standard redistricting process resumes for all future redistricting after the 2030 census? So the problem here with this is the wording. Should the Constitution of Virginia be amended to allow the General Assembly to temporarily adopt new congressional districts to restore fairness in the upcoming elections? To restore fairness. Friends, the number of people that understand, if you've listened to this program, if you have read about how districts are drawn, the process, if you've even listened to conversations, if you've listened to this program, I am telling you right now, you are in the top 5 or 10% of people in this country who understand redistricting, how it happens, why it happens, when it typically happens in relation to the census, whose power it is constitutionally, and just that entire process. You know, you may have heard before, if you spend, it's an amazingly short amount of time. If you spend like 10 or 15 minutes a day reading on a particular subject, in a matter of just a few months, you become someone who knows more about that topic than the vast majority of people in our country. It's just the way that it is. People don't know as much as they want to pretend that they know. And people want to have opinions on this because it, of course, has political implications. But their opinions are pretty much worthless because they don't understand the mechanics of this. They don't understand what's constitutional. They don't understand who has the authority. They don't understand that each state, as we've gone through, have their own sets of rules. Indiana didn't really have any requirements other than the state legislature has to redraw districts every 10 years. That's the rule. And that, by the way, is the baseline bare minimum from the Constitution. Some states have made the way districts are drawn part of their constitution. And so they can't do something procedurally to redraw districts if it violates what their constitution says, or maybe they're just a statute, a law that has been passed as to how this happens and when it happens and the process by which it happens. Some of them have created commissions and these so-called non-political entities who make these decisions. Give me a break. This is a political process. No matter how much you try to pretend it's not, there is no objective, fair standard on what a congressional district should look like. I've been through this till I'm blue in the face. It's the reason why I was trying to plead with my Republican friends, with the state senators in Indiana. It's the reason I went to the State House to speak at the Turning Point event in the Rotunda, trying to persuade Republican state senators in this state to pass the redrawn maps. But some simply refuse for reasons I still don't understand, because they say it's unfair, because they say Democrats should have representation. Democrats can still vote for representation if they elect, or I should say nominate, people who actually are more sane and who are not radical leftists. They have better chances of winning. In fact, when you redistrict in your state, what you actually end up doing is taking, let's just say, a Republican state trying to redistrict. You take your Republican vote that you have and you dilute it. You spread it out. So by definition, all of the districts are going to become all the districts Republicans have won are going to become more competitive because they've taken those Republican voters and spread them out more equally, meaning that if some candidate comes along who's a Democrat, and this, by the way, is the same vice versa in a Democrat state that's trying to redistrict, it's actually statistically easier to win these districts as the party who's not in power because you've diluted the vote of the majority party. It doesn't mean it's likely. It just means it's more likely to maybe have some swing districts come into play. Now, they're careful as to how they try to do this, but that's certainly what happens mathematically. And so all these things remain the same. You can still vote for Democrats. No one is being having their vote taken away. No one is being suppressed as a voter. They're just not able to have a clear advantage in as many districts, statistically speaking. But as I said, the advantage the Republicans have actually decreases across the districts that they've typically won because they've taken those Republican voters and spread them out to districts where Democrats typically win. So it's just by understanding that, you're ahead of 90 to 95% of the people. And fortunately, we have this judge who says, listen, you can't, one of the problems here is this the way that this is written. And by the way, that's not all the problems that there are with this referendum. We went through those earlier this week. I'm not going to hash them out, but it does revolve around the state meeting the standards, including the amount of time that the amendment must be passed by the legislature in the state of Commonwealth of Virginia before it goes to the voters for referendum. It didn't meet that threshold. It didn't meet the threshold that said it had to be voted on in the legislature. Then there had to be an election, and then they would vote on it again. And they didn't follow that process. Early voting had begun before they had, completed the vote on the first passage of the amendment. Basically, they didn't do anything right when it came to how they did this. They saw that they were in a political disadvantage, and they wanted to rush and hurry to try to make sure they were ready by the midterms. And this is, again, as we said earlier this week, because of Ken Cuccinelli and how he was out there explaining this, trying to get people's attention. It's coming to pass exactly as he predicted it would, and we've just scratched the surface here because there's more to this. This might be headed to the Supreme Court next week in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we'll talk about that on the other side of the break. Sit tight, my friends. You're listening here to the home of conservative, not bitter talk. I'm your host, the one and the only, the ever so benevolent dictator behind the microphone, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends, talking about the fallout, the legal fallout of this referendum that has passed the Commonwealth of Virginia based upon several legal problems with this referendum. I don't want to go, again, I talked about this earlier in the week. You can listen there. You can go and look at some of the things that former Attorney General of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli, has said. He's been spot on this, and a judge has placed an injunction on this, basically pausing this taking effect. Supreme Court's going to hear this in Virginia next week. It's a lot to process here. And I want to play a clip of the current Attorney General in the state of Commonwealth of Virginia, Jay Jones, out there trying to make the case that he's defending this and that this is judicial activism and so forth. But we'll get to that, my friends, as the program unfolds here in the time we have remaining. There's a lot of confusion out there about kratom. You've probably heard the headlines, and most of those headlines that you read that are negative about kratom, that sound concerning, are not based on real kratom. They're based on synthetic junk that isn't even real kratom at all. Real kratom is natural, it's tested, it's handled with care. It's not some synthetic blend. It is, again, natural, and there's a process. It's been used for generations. This is what you get from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. You get the real thing, not synthetic garbage and junk. This is a family-run company They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. Every batch is lab tested for purity. There's no chemicals, no fillers, no shortcuts. Again, this has been used for generations. For generations. And it is a real alternative for people looking for something that doesn't come with a warning label that is a mile long. Once you do your research and decide, hey, this is something I would like to try, start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Coupon code Todd Huff. It's my first and last name, my friends. Todd Huff gets you 10% off your first order. That's all one word. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's the website. Again, Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. Okay, so Virginia Attorney General was on an interview with CNN News Central yesterday, Thursday. And I want to play a bit of this as she's asking him about the bill, the language of the bill. He's going to talk about judicial activism. I just want to give you, again, he's a Democrat. He is trying to defend this bill, make sure it gets introduced as law for political purposes, which, again, I don't fault him for any of this. I fault him for, well, being inconsistent. I fault him for pretending that there's no problems with this when there absolutely are. There's no debate that there are problems with this. Not because the state legislature doesn't have the authority to do this, but because the state legislature didn't follow the prescribed rules in the Commonwealth of Virginia's Constitution. This is important, critically important. The whole point of a constitution is to set forth the rules and the framework about the power of government, the role of government, what government can do, what those steps look like when it does actually try to enforce, or I should say exercise its power. And it didn't do it. I think it's objectively obvious. Cuccinelli's out there. Ken Cuccinelli's saying that he thinks that this might be a unanimous decision in the Supreme Court of Virginia. So we will see where that goes. But this is what is being said right now. Jay Jones on CNN News Central talking about the legal challenges to their referendum. Here we go.
Joined now by Virginia's Attorney General, Jay Jones. Sir, thank you so much for being with us. You're obviously familiar with the judge's argument here. Judge Hurley citing multiple substantial and procedural problems, including that the ballot question for the constitutional amendment was flagrantly misleading, as I said.
Obviously.
The ballot question says new congressional districts will be temporarily adopted to, quote, restore fairness.
Oh, yes.
Does he have a point that it's misleading?
Come on, of course he does.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. You know, look, we are excited that Virginia went out to the polls on Tuesday, made their voices heard. Turnout was robust. Both sides engaged in a vigorous campaign, and the yes side prevailed. And now, as Attorney General, my job is to enforce the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so we won't let one activist judge in one county in Virginia try to offset the will of the people of this Commonwealth, where more than 1.6 million voted yes. And so we will be in court very soon. My office appealed the decision, and we are going to get this resolved quickly so that we can bring some clarity to the situation.
I'm going to pause. Judicial activism. He's accused, Jay Jones, Attorney General of Virginia, has accused this judge who placed a temporary injunction on this referendum being finalized. He accused this judge of judicial activism. This is not dealing with reality at all. Judicial activism is a very specific thing, and it is something that I am incredibly bothered by. It matters tremendously in this country, and it's a dangerous thing. But you have to properly define what it is, because a judge can absolutely make a ruling on a case brought before him. So someone can bring a case against a law that's been enacted in a state, for example. You can bring a case. You can say that has violated the state constitution or for whatever reason. And the judge can hear the case on its merits. And the judge's job is to interpret the law and the Constitution. That's what his or her job is, to say, okay, we have rules, we have a process, or maybe we don't have a process. But if we have a rule and a process that's a statute, just the general law, or if it went through the process of being entered into the Constitution, which this had, in fact, that's why this has the threshold of requiring an amendment to the state constitution in Virginia because they already had an amendment dealing with this. So they were trying to change the amendment to allow them to change the rules so that they could redistrict, which again is in one sense totally fine because that is the prerogative of the state legislature. However, in another sense, that's totally what I want to say. It's totally illegal to do it in a way that isn't consistent with the law and the Constitution. And as I've shared today a little bit, and as I shared on Wednesday in much more detail, this is exactly what happened. So judicial activism is when a judge actually they step outside the bounds of their particular role. So, for example, a judge is totally within his rights, her rights, to make a case and cite the law and say this is why. Judicial activism is what you have from leftist judges. This is what happens. This is the strategy that is used when a person has a desire to further a political agenda and they want to justify it through any means possible. They don't even care if they justify it. The ends justify the means, right? So a judicial activist, this is when I remember there was a Supreme Court justice, I think it was Brennan. It's been a while, but I remember him saying that justices could cite foreign law in their opinions on the U.S. Supreme Court, to which I replied that we are a half step away from being able to cite Harry Potter novels in our Supreme Court. What foreign law has to do with our law? It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of the judiciary. The judiciary is supposed to be the voice, if you will, of the state constitution, of the state law, of the U.S. Constitution when these things are applicable. They're supposed to. The judge is supposed to be the voice of those things, of laws that have been passed that are still on the books, of constitutional amendments which are still on the books, so to speak, long after the people who voted for them are gone. The people who comprise the current legislature may or may not like those. It doesn't matter because they're on the books, and this is how it's supposed to work. We are a nation that's supposed to follow the rule of law, and if the law has been broken, and it can be argued systematically, even if I don't disagree with it, or even if I disagree with it and you disagree with it. But if it can be, the case can be made that here's what the law says, here's how I interpret it, here's how that doesn't comply. It doesn't meet the requirements of the law. I have to say, as such, the results of what just happened are not legitimate. That's how this works. Judicial activism is when someone says, I want to cite foreign law, or I just don't like what happened here, and I'm going to say my opinion is this. They're not the same thing. The left who uses judicial activism. I have to take a break, my friends. Quick time out, back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment of the program today. Last time you're going to hear my voice this week. I know it's a sad, sad time, but listen, the best way to hear what else we have to say about the issues, the topics, is to subscribe to the Inner Circle. It is free. We've got an archive of a lot of stuff you could delve into. All you have to do is text the word truth to 317-785-1030, and you can get those for free. And you'll be busy even when you're caught up on the program. There's a lot of other stuff that you'll be able, my friends, to get to. You know, one of the biggest challenges conservatives like you have is finding ways to ensure that you're consistent. You're consistently living out your values, and that includes in making sure your investments align with your values as well. 4-8 Financial specializes in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith, your values, so you're not funding things that go completely against your beliefs. They do the heavy lifting for you. All you have to do is complete an easy assessment. It's quick and easy to help them make sure your investments are aligned with your purpose, with your goals. So, if you want to take that assessment, head on over to 48financial.com/Todd now. 48financial.com/Todd. Don't put this off. It's a quick and easy assessment, and they will give you the results, and you can decide. You can decide what, if anything, you want to do. Maybe you find out that it's exactly in alignment. Your investments are aligned with your values. Maybe you find out they're halfway there. Maybe you find out they're completely against your values. Whatever the case, you need to know this information. It's quick and easy. 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, because your money should work for your values and certainly not against them. All right, so if I pulled up AI. I don't know what this is. Google's AI. And it says this: judicial activism is the philosophy that judges should use their rulings to influence policy, protect individual rights, and address social needs rather than strictly adhering to precedent or legislative intent. In other words, it's more important for the judge to implement his or her own policy, preference, whatever he or she thinks the outcome should be, just to say that's what it should be. That's judicial activism. It's not strictly adhering to judicial to the precedent of the court, the intent of the legislation. It's just kind of going out on your own and saying it's what happened. It's candidly what happened in the original Roe versus Wade case in 1973, when 9 old white men in black robes told women what they could do with their bodies. I'm just using the language of the left. This is what happened. This was judicial activism. They just made these things up. They just made up the trimester stuff, when you can have a baby, the viability of the unborn child, all that stuff just made up by the court. They had nothing to do with laws none of that. Just make it up. There we go. This is what we think is fair. That is not the role of judges, of the court. The job of judges is to interpret fairly the Constitution, statutes, and then look at the facts of the case and apply them and say, well, this followed that. The outcome. You remember when Kavanaugh, I think it was Kavanaugh, when he had his hearing for his Supreme Court nomination before the U.S. Senate committee, he said, my job as a judge is to interpret the law. And he made some comment, I'm going to paraphrase the idea. He basically said, look, if I don't make some decisions that I'm not personally bothered by, I'm not doing my job. And this is why. What he meant was, if there's a law that says this is the law of the land, this is the law, and it says something that he personally doesn't agree with, it's his job as a judge to put all that aside. And I know in this highly political world that we live in, and the high emotions and the fact that everything is now political, this seems impossible for people to be able to do. And candidly, even a lot of judges cannot avoid that temptation. But the truth is that's how it should work. It's 100% how it should work. You should look at the law and you should say, hey, it's what it says. I personally disagree, but that's not my job. I am the voice of that law, the best that we can have. As a judge, I'm the voice of the Constitution. I'm the voice of piecing together what the law and the Constitution says and how that applies to this case. My opinion doesn't matter whatsoever. I am not here for myself. If I want to be here for myself and my beliefs and the beliefs of the people that I represent, I need to go run for Congress. I need to be sitting in the office as a congressman or a senator. I shouldn't be thinking that way, acting that way as a judge. That's not the way that it's supposed to work. It simply isn't. And the left has used this tool, judicial activism, for a long time. Mark Levin's written books about this, talking about the nine people in the long black robes who can they can just declare whatever, because our system assumed, I guess is the word, that there would be judicial restraint and that politics would not infiltrate the judiciary. And if it did, there's means to remove judges, which has been talked about recently because we've dealt with so much of this. But this is how you can impeach a judge. This is if judges are interpreting things clearly outside the confines of the Constitution and the law. That's what should be done. And that's the mechanism to fix this. But I'm just out of time here, my friends. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for listening. SDG.